What's up, guys? Been away for a little while. Had some travel to Austin for the Pioneer Meet. Checked in briefly after that, and then I headed to Kansas City for the Showdown. And I can talk about that at another time if you guys are interested. But for today, I want to talk about a really cool topic, which is blood work and how it relates to your health, whether or not you use exogenous hormones under a doctor's supervision, of course. So recently, I was approached by a company called Let's Get Checked, which is a private blood screening company, I guess you could call them, that has a really cool business model. So they send you a little kit to test your own blood work. It uses a blood draw similar to a glucometer, so just a little finger prick. You send your sample away, and they send your results back, and you can get it, privately, totally securely through your phone, and you can even follow up with a physician if you like. The reason I mention this is because a lot of people, myself included, feel a little bit uncomfortable going to the doctor and asking for blood work. Now, you guys know I normally don't like to plug products, but I do think this is a pretty cool business model that's beneficial to a lot of people if you have that problem. Obviously, if you're good with talking to your doctor one-on-one and you trust them, by all means do that. But if you're a little uncomfortable with that and you would prefer to keep things anonymous, I think this is a really good way to do it. What I'm going to talk about specifically today is what tests I recommend you get, regardless of whether you use Let's Get Checked or another company, or go through your doctor directly, and how you can interpret those without panicking, I guess, because a lot of people, myself included again, have the tendency to see numbers that are unusual or unexpected and kind of freak out. And that's not always the appropriate response. In fact, it's never the appropriate response. The appropriate response, if you have any concerns, is to go to your doctor and talk about them. But it can be helpful to have kind of an idea of what you might expect, if you do use exogenous hormones. And if you don't, to determine whether or not you're ready. So, usually when you get a blood panel, you'll get what's called a comprehensive metabolic screening. You'll get, if you order it, you'll get some type of hormone screening. And then again, if you order it, you can get, lipid profiles, which are going to deal with things like cholesterol and triglycerides. And now, a lot of this data is useful. Not all of it is going to be necessary for everyone, but there are some kind of hot spots that I think are worth talking about. And again, if you go to Let's Get Checked, you can order these all independently, and I'll tell you which ones I recommend at the end of the video. But starting out with testosterone, okay? So usually there are different kinds of testosterone kind of tests. One is a CAPT test. It's going to tell you if your testosterone is over a certain level, which is generally the highest level you'll ever find in someone who does not use exogenous hormones. That, for most enhanced lifters, is not going to be super helpful because you want to know, okay, if I'm taking, let's say, 250 milligrams of testosterone and my levels are over that kind of whatever cutoff it might be, let's say 1500 for free testosterone. If your levels are over that, well, they could be 1501, they could be 2500. And if you're trying to cruise, for example, and your test levels are 2500, that's not great. That's probably is going to have some impact on your health. So I do recommend that you get the uncapped test. Now, regardless of whether you're enhanced or not, you're also going to have a number called free testosterone. So what happens is the testosterone in your body binds to a protein called sex hormone binding globulin. And when it's bound like that, your body can't really use it for the purposes that testosterone is normally used for. So free testosterone is unbound. That's what's going to have a bigger impact on your performance, on your physique, on your results. And there are compounds that you can use to manipulate SHBG, but for right now, the important thing is to get a baseline of, okay, what is my free testosterone and how does that compare to my total testosterone? If that's off base, then you know, okay, I need to talk to my doctor about other circumstances that might be impacting my health. Now, what's the correct level for free testosterone? Well, that's going to vary from individual to individual, but when you get the test, it will tell you whether you're over baseline or not and how far over baseline you are. So you can compare that to your total testosterone and you can get some sort of idea, where you should be at. And of course, you always have to consider how you feel. Yes, that's a subjective measure, but if your free testosterone is kind of on the low side, relative to what you would expect, and you feel phenomenal and you're getting phenomenal results, it's probably not worth worrying about. So that's where you're going to start. Now, the more important things in the long run are really your health markers. And the first ones we're going to start with are going to show up on the comprehensive metabolic panel. So the most commonly known one deals with your liver enzymes, so AST and ALT. The prevailing knowledge says that, okay, if you're using oral steroids, well, these numbers are going to be elevated because oral steroids tend to hurt your liver, right? Your liver has to work really hard to process them because to some degree they are seen as poisons from your body, and your liver kind of works to break them down into forms that are able to be excreted. Now, that is one way that your AST and ALT can be elevated. And if they're elevated over about 100, well, that's pretty bad. It's not terrible. I've seen far worse numbers, but that's kind of the point where I would start to get worried, is over 2 to 3 times baseline. If you're under 2 to 3 times baseline, let's say the baseline on your test, because they vary from test to test, but let's say your baseline is 50 and you're at like 65. There's a lot of other things that can impact your liver, and you might not have to worry about that number. And one of those things, the most common one, is training hard. So if you train really, really hard one day and you get a blood test the next morning, I can almost guarantee that your AST and ALT are going to be elevated. And that's not something to freak out as long as they're not elevated too much. Really, you should avoid, if you want a perfectly accurate number, you should avoid training for 7 to 10 days before you get your blood drawn. I don't know anybody who's going to take 7 to 10 days off to get their blood drawn, so that's not really practical, but it's something to consider. Again, if your enzymes are very high, well, that is concerning, right? Yes, your liver can regenerate, but that's not something that you want to push. The health of your body, your organs, is paramount, not only to survival, but also to progress over the long run. If you beat your body into the ground, inside or outside, you're not going to be able to progress. So if it is elevated, you can talk to your doctor. You can also use over-the-counter supplements, okay? The ones for the liver would be NAC and TUDCA. NAC is no longer available through Amazon. You'll have to go through another company. But that's usually known as something that you will take while you are using oral steroids or while you're doing other things that will stress your liver. It will keep your liver from getting too beat up. TUDCA, I generally recommend after you've done whatever is going to hurt your liver, because that will help the liver to heal up faster. You also don't want to take TUDCA year-round. That's something that can actually be detrimental. Okay, so AST and ALT, very commonly known, honestly, very rarely a problem. They can be, but I'd say that's less common than things that impact the kidneys. So these are going to be your blood urea nitrogen and your creatinine, and then also your blood pressure, which is one that's very, very commonly overlooked and arguably one of the most important health indicators that you can get. Now, you're not going to get a blood test for your blood pressure, obviously. You're going to ask the doctor to put on a cuff. You're going to buy a cuff yourself some other way, but you do need to keep your blood pressure in check. For right now, I'm going to focus on your blood urea nitrogen and your creatinine. So we'll start with creatinine. This is a measure of how much muscle damage your kidneys are processing. The problem with the creatinine test is that it can be elevated just like the liver enzymes for reasons other than the fact that your kidneys aren't doing so hot. So for example, training hard could probably elevate your creatinine levels a little bit. Taking creatine anecdotally has, in my experience, been shown to elevate creatinine levels. And probably most importantly, the creatinine test is not it's biased based on how much muscle mass you have. So very muscular individuals, because they have more muscle mass, their kidneys are going to process more broken down muscle, right, every time you train. So this number will be elevated in individuals who have higher amounts of muscle mass than is usually found in the average person. If your creatinine level is elevated and it's very high, and that would be, to me, very high. Usually the baseline for creatinine is somewhere 1.1, 1.3 in that range. To me, if you're over like 1.6, that's probably something that would be concerning. Again, it's going to vary from individual to individual. I once met a person whose creatinine score was 6 and he went into kidney failure shortly thereafter. So it is something that you really need to keep an eye on. But if it's a concern for you and it's not super elevated to the point where you think you need to talk to a doctor, I would recommend getting a cystatin C test. This is a very similar measure of kidney function, but it's not related. It's independent of muscle mass. So even if you are a very muscular individual, you should get an unbiased result from this test. That is not something that's available on Let's Get Checked. It's not something I feel like most people would need, but I did want to mention it. Okay? Now, one more thing to note about creatinine. You will see on your blood test usually a number called eGFR. This is estimated glomerular fibrillation rate. I can't say that middle word, but you can look it up and guess what I mean. Now, GFR is kind of the gold standard for how your kidneys are functioning, and you have to get a very specific GFR test. It's pretty expensive and hard to get. eGFR is literally your creatinine score plugged into a formula that's then, manipulated based on whether you're African American or not, because African Americans have different baselines for, kidney function. eGFR is not a useful measure for most people because it is just a restatement of your creatinine. So don't freak out if that number is lower than expected if it's in line with your creatinine score. Now, your blood urea nitrogen, this is a measure of, okay, how much protein is in your blood. Again, you want this number to be within baseline, but if it's slightly elevated, it could just mean you're eating more protein than your body is able to use. So back off on the protein a little bit. It's, again, not something to freak out for. If it's very elevated and your creatinine is also very elevated, go to a doctor, all right? But if just one is a little bit off, you don't have to have a meltdown over it, okay? It's still concerning. You still need to get in check. You should probably reduce your protein intake, get checked again in about 6 weeks. But I wouldn't recommend freaking out. I don't think it's going to help you. And again, worst case, you can always just talk to a doctor. Now, the third thing I want to talk about is lipids and triglycerides. So these are numbers that almost everybody's familiar with. These are things like cholesterol. These are not things that are going to impact your performance or even your health in the short term, but in the long term they can, and so you need to make sure you keep an eye on them. The common compound that's known for really killing your cholesterol is Anavar. Obviously, any anabolic steroid is probably not healthy for you. It's probably going to hurt your cholesterol numbers, but that is one of the big deals. If your cholesterol numbers are elevated, yes, you could get on a statin, which your doctor is probably willing to prescribe, but first I would try just cleaning up your diet and implementing more cardio in your routine, okay? Again, this is more of a long-term problem. It's not something that you need to freak out immediately for, especially if you know why your cholesterol is elevated or, your good cholesterol is suppressed, but it is something that you need to pay attention to. I'm not saying these are the only things that are important. There's other important metrics that you need to be aware of, things like hematocrit, red blood cell count, and depending on the individual, things like electrolytes could be manipulated or could be off from where they should be. So every number on the panel is important, but in my experience, those are the three things that, tend to be off for people who do use exogenous substances. Please, 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 please do not take this as medical advice. This is just my experience with the numbers that I find, okay, I need to keep an eye on these, and if these are in range, then I'm in pretty good shape. Again, I do work with a doctor to make sure that I am in good shape and I'm not just telling myself lies. But I also want to make sure that everybody is kind of informed about these things for two reasons. One, if you're already using steroids, well, you need to be getting blood work and you need to make sure you're not killing yourself because, over time these substances can be dangerous if they're abused. Number two, and arguably more important, anyone who is considering using exogenous hormones needs to get blood work before they do that so that they have a baseline to compare to. There are genetic reasons why these numbers can differ from the scale, the baseline that's considered normal. And if you're one of those individuals that has one of these genetic conditions that's causing your cholesterol to be really high or causing your creatinine to be over baseline or anything like that, well, you need to know that before you start so that you know how the steroids are affecting you and whether it's even something that you can risk doing, right? If you're somebody who has a very bad history of heart disease, well, you probably should stay away from these things, all right? So that's the reason I'm making this video. I'm not saying, please do not think I'm saying, oh, well, Ben said, I don't need to worry about my BUN and I don't need to worry about my AST. That's not the case at all. I just want you to be a little bit more informed about these numbers so that you do take them very seriously, but you don't allow them to send you into some hypochondriac spiral of, fear and paranoia and depression. So that's kind of where I'm going with this. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of good information out there when it comes to blood work. Ultimately, the only correct answer is to talk to your doctor, but hopefully this video helps you to do that in a more informed way, in a way that you can feel comfortable about, kind of handling. If you have any questions, concerns, or if you disagree with any of the information, please, post it in the comments below, because certainly I don't want to mislead anybody, and I also want to make sure that I can help as much as possible. I do have a link below to Let's Get Checked, and I do have a discount code that has a short or a small discount. I do not get kickbacks from that specific code, but I would, if it turns out to be something that you guys feel is valuable, I'm going to try to work with Let's Get Checked to come up with like a comprehensive test that you can order to make sure you have everything kind of checked out. Because again, I do really think that it's a valuable service. You have to be getting your blood work done, whether you go through them or somebody else. And so that's why I wanted to take the time to mention them. Again, this was a sponsored promotion, right? So they did pay me to make this video, but at the same time, I really, really feel like this is valuable information. So I just want to be totally transparent with you guys there. Again, questions, concerns, disagreements, arguments, whatever, comments below. And talk to your fucking doctor. Do not use this as medical advice. All right? I think that kind of covers it for me, and I will see you next time.